Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors consisting of some of the best tech leaders in the world, people you may have never heard of, but who in just an hour, you'll know their unfiltered career story. The bets they took, the decisions they made, where they failed, and the lessons that they learned along the way. Welcome to the What Makes You Tick podcast. Hello there, I'm Tolu, aka The Podfather, and I'm the host of What Makes You Tick.
Hello there. I'm Richard
Hello.
Washington. I'm the founder of Tick Talent. We're delighted to sponsor this podcast. We've got a really special one today, Tolu. Who is this week's guest?
This week is a founder special, Adam Baker. What did you think of this episode, Rich?
I love this episode. So I met Adam at a Pavilion dinner and was lucky enough to be on the same table as him. And in these dinners that they do monthly at Pavilion, you have a group of probably 50 to 60 executives within go-to-market tech teams of all different specializations as well as different levels of their careers. And you're in a team of 8 people on a table, and you talk about the challenges that you're facing as a business as well as the triumphs that you've achieved. And I remember that the first thing that Adam said is that he just won like a world championship of martial arts at 50 years old. I was like, okay, that's quite impressive.
Wild.
And then you hear he's a founder. He set up 3 businesses from scratch. He's worked in some of the biggest tech companies in the world. He's had roles as chief revenue officers. He's been a 3-time CEO. He's just an incredibly impressive person, but really down to earth, super sharp.
Yeah.
Super engaging, lots of gravitas, a mind that you could just spend a hell of a lot of time speaking to because there's so much depth there and understanding, and just this real genuine passion for people and building businesses and solving complex problems. So I think that this is a masterclass in what it takes to build a world-class business, do that 3 times, scale those businesses, exit those businesses, and ultimately, what does the mindset and the behaviors need to be to make that kind of repeated success happen again and again? From the perspective of the person who had the conversation, Tolu, what resonated with you the most?
Adam is a champion, is what I would say. So, like, in basketball, you have this theory of like the repeat or the 3-peat, like when you win back-to-back championships. And when I was talking about the preacher, I'm like, you've done that, but in business. And it's quite rare actually to have one successful business that you build from scratch and you sell. He did that twice. And it looks like he might be on his way to do the 3rd time. He might do a 3-peat. And I just think that there's such an interesting mindset. And what I loved was that he did it in businesses that he didn't really know that much about, which I found fascinating. But I think the way his brain works, they find really interesting gaps in the market that are like future gaps and start building things to solve those future gaps. And that for me was just fascinating. But he's also really self-aware. And that really, especially at the end, he talks some really self-aware stuff. And I was like, fair play to you, mate. Like, it was a really, really interesting, slightly different conversation because it was more founder-y than really like pure tech sales. But I loved it. And I think we should do more conversations like that.
Absolutely. Well, I know that people are going to love this episode. It's probably one you're going to watch a couple of times just to go and get all the detail out of it. So without further ado, let's roll the VT.
Adam, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tolu. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm very excited to hear a lot more about your journey. The first question, Adam, though, is what makes you tick?
It's a good question. I think from a personal level, which is where I always start, I link everything back to people. So I think on a personal level, family and friends and the people I surround myself with, both in terms of, having people that I can talk to about lots of different things, the support network, people that I can have fun with. I guess you surround yourself with great people, and they're the kind of almost the sum of what makes you tick. So that definitely is what makes me tick. And I think the other thing personally is just being active. I'm very active. I don't feel myself if I'm not constantly active.
Okay.
And that could mean taking a long walk. And often I'll look at my calendar and I'll see what meetings I've got that I don't need to be on video for, and I'll just go out for a 2-hour walk and take those calls while I'm out. And I think particularly post-COVID, that's become much easier.
Yeah.
And so, it's for me, it's great. I'm outside, I'm keeping active. Hopefully the weather's good, and I can also take my work and have my conversations and my calls. So being active, I'm a martial artist.
Okay.
I have been since I was 16. I'm now 50. So I compete regularly still. I think being active is really something important to me and something that makes me tick. And then I think on a more kind of the business context side, I love staying curious. I love learning. I want to kind of learn new things. I like to be exposed to areas that I'm not very strong in. And I wouldn't necessarily gravitate towards going really deep on a topic that I'm not
Okay.
that knowledgeable on, but I would certainly like to, skim the surface of a lot of things. I'm a great believer in being brilliant at, one or two things, and
Okay.
then having plenty of knowledge about a lot of others. I think, I kind of have that across all of my whole life, whether it's my martial arts, whether it's work, whether it's a topic that I'm really interested in, really understanding something very, very well, I think is better than having this vast knowledge of a whole bunch of things, but not much of it.
Yeah.
And so, staying curious, learning a lot, but developing your core skills definitely makes me tick. And then I think just from an entrepreneurial perspective, I've founded 3 companies. The challenge of figuring things out, experimenting, navigating problems and roadblocks, I love that. It's definitely what makes me tick. I'm quintessentially an entrepreneur. I'm somebody that really likes to get scrappy in those early stage environments, and just figure out how to win. What do we need to do? And it just takes time, lots of optimizing, lots of experimentation, and that definitely makes me tick because I really thrive on that.
Can you tell us a little bit about the 3 companies that you founded, and just so we can understand like how, if they're different, if they're the same, what were the 3 companies that you founded?
Yeah, so they're all B2B software companies. That's definitely my area of knowledge. I started my career in software sales, working for a very large company called Intuit. Spent 7 years there. So I grew up selling software. And I was, at the time, working in the media sector. And media was, back in the mid-90s, was the biggest industry. It was huge. Newspapers, magazines. It was just a massive market. And one of the challenges that all of my customers were facing, and increasingly becoming the biggest challenge they were facing, was how do they migrate their offline revenue to digital revenue. And, it sounds extraordinary today, but, I could very easily, if I was selling advertising space, for example, who were my customers, I could very easily convince a company to spend $100,000 on a half-page advert in a magazine because it had an audited readership, but I couldn't get them to spend $1,000 on anything online. And obviously, the world's completely flipped now. But back then, it was very difficult. And so I kept hearing this. I didn't sell media. I just sold it into media. So I kept hearing it. And so I left Intuit and set up my first company that was called Rehash. And we basically built a very rudimentary tool that tracked up and downstream traffic. That was our first product. So we could now go to these media owners and we can say, look, you can now show your advertisers where buyers, or where your visitors are coming from and where they leave and go to. And it was insight they didn't have. It was way before Google Analytics. And then we started to develop the platform, contextualize the page. So now you could say this page is 70% about Formula One, 10% about Monaco, and 20% about Michael Schumacher. And what that enabled media owners to do and ad networks was to then go out and target specific brands against specific pieces of content. And that was something they hadn't been able to do before. And so that was the tipping point for us. It took us about 2 years to get to that point where we had that product. And that was the tipping point for us. So we built that company. And then we were acquired in 2007. And I then went to work for Salesforce. It was a very, very good experience working for them because I'd come out of a very large organization at Intuit, but wasn't very savvy in terms of how I went to market, really. Then very, very scrappy building my own company to Salesforce that was still very early on, and they were doing they were doing $500 million revenue.
Okay, I was going to say that's very early if it's $500,000.
Not $500,000. And so but that was very early on for them, but they were still so advanced in terms of how they were thinking, how they set themselves up, and I learned a hell of a lot there. And then I left and set my second company up, which was more of a passion than anything else. I'm a big news junkie, love current affairs, always have. This was 2009, so the world was just starting to get tablets and smartphones, and they were, in my opinion, the best placed people to capture news they were witnessing. If you think about newsrooms, and it's largely the same now as it was, in 2009 when I founded the company. If you think about the bias that a newsreader or news organization might have, or the fact that it's dangerous to be in these places and kind of logistically you can't get everywhere, you can't report on everything. And you didn't, at that point, Twitter was there, but people weren't really using it. The kind of the term fake news and just wasn't there. And so we built some software that enabled anonymous sources from around the world to capture what they were witnessing and send it to us. And we verified it in real time using some algorithms that we'd built. And we initially launched it to become the next Huffington Post for kind of people-powered news. And we broke some incredible stories before anybody else. And there was always is a good story that I always come back to. Is I was sat on a panel talking about breaking news, and next to me on the panel was somebody that was the head of Sky News, basically the head of breaking news for Sky News, and he said to me, you've got this news item on here. We haven't got that. That's got to be fake. Why are you putting stuff like that out there? And I said, well, we've verified it. We're pretty sure, and it was a big story. We're pretty sure it's true. He said, well, I think it's not useful. And then 7 hours later, that story became verified, and Sky News approached us for our footage, and then spent the next probably 4 weeks this guy tweeting about us and telling everybody that they want real breaking news. And that was a real moment in our journey, because our traffic just soared and we started to get lots of credibility. This was about 18 months in, and we'd made no revenue, like nothing until that point. Wow. And then we got a big broadcaster in the US approach us and offer to pay us. From memory, I think it was about $150K for some footage that we had, and I turned it down because our model. Our model was to publish this and become, the destination that people went to for this news. And then I just remember going away I was away for the weekend, and all I could think about was how daft I'd been. We had no revenue. We were, 18 months, and I just turned down 150K. Like, what was I in this for? And then I got a notepad, and I just scribbled out what a pivot could look like for us if we, became a SaaS company, which is what I knew anyway. I built SaaS companies. I hadn't built a news company, and fundamentally, the reason I set that first that company up in the first place was because I wanted to get exposure for the news events that were happening around the world that weren't being covered. And so I thought, well, actually, this is a massive global news agency. They're going to give this a way more exposure and a platform to be seen than we can. And they're going to pay us for it. Like, what are we doing? So I basically just emailed my CTO and said, just stop everything. We're changing strategy. Like, we need to turn off what we've got, and we need to license it. And I then moved literally within 3 weeks from London to New York, and just went and did a beauty parade of all the media owners, came out with about 10 contracts, and realized at that point we had a company. We had a business model that could work. And and again, that was the moment that I realized that we'd built great technology. It added a lot of value to existing newsrooms and companies. Why try and become one of them? Why try and compete with, the Daily Mail and Huffington Post? Why not help them? And so we turned off all of our kind of consumer-facing content, and we started to license it, and then license our software to help them do the same thing. And then eventually we were acquired in 2015, early 15. And I moved back to London. And then I spent quite a few years trying to figure out what was next, and made some investments and helping other founders. And I learned so much doing that. I've always been a solo founder, and I've always had mentors, but most things have always been my decision. And I think, I'm quite a logical person, but I don't know everything, obviously. But some of the decisions that the founders were making that I was now working with and trying to help were extraordinary. And I just couldn't fathom what was going on. And what I realized was founders are just very focused, blinkered individuals. They've got a strategy, they've got a vision. It's their way, they believe it's right, and it's hard to really influence. And I learned so much over those few years, helping other founders navigate through challenges I'd never seen myself, trying to help them think critically about decision making. And it was just really interesting. I probably learned more, if I'm honest, in that 3-year period than I did building my 2 companies, because I just learned about how other people deal with things, how they think about things, decision making, trying to help them, as said, overcome hurdles I hadn't seen. And then I took up a couple of roles, like chief revenue officer roles. One at a million ARR SaaS company, and we grew that to 4 million in 18 months. So we quadrupled revenue. And then the other was at 50 million, and when I left, it was at 100 million. And just really enjoyed helping establish companies, or companies looking with some revenue that weren't mine, navigate the challenges that they had to help them scale. And again, learned a lot, really enjoyed it. And then the opportunity to start another company came along. It wasn't something that I'd actually planned on doing. I think two for me was enough. But I then founded DealPad.
Okay.
Yeah, which is what I'm working on today. And we founded that in 2020.
Okay.
And DealPad essentially brings together my domain expertise in software and sales. And it's the first company that I've founded that I've really understood. You know, like I've been in software sales
Yes.
since 1996. I'd never been in the media market when I launched my first company selling into media owners. You know, I'm not a journalist or a news person. When I built my second company selling into that market, you know, this is, you know, I've sat in the seat of our buyer and our user for 30 years with the company I'm building now. But it's been the hardest journey. It's been harder than the other two. And it's been really interesting. And going back to what makes me tick, it's figuring this out, because, you know, you'd think with the experience that I've got in software and in sales, selling a product into a software company and into their sales team, we'd probably nail it. And you know, what I've learned is that software or salespeople generally are quite blinkered. They think they know it all. They think they've got their process nailed down. They don't need help. And, you know, when you look at 2023, when you look at last year, 75% of salespeople in the software industry missed quota.
Really?
Yeah, massive.
Wow.
Right? Now, if you think about what that means to a software company, you know, when their salespeople aren't hitting quotas, they're dropping revenue massively. The problem actually is exasperated when you look at revenue per rep. And so, you know, you might have, and most companies will have one or two high performing salespeople that, you know, are probably contributing 200 to 300% of their quota. That then, you know, mitigates a lot of the loss that they're seeing from the other salespeople in their team not hitting quota. But that's a problem, because those high performing individuals may not perform very well next year, or the market dynamics might change. And yet now, you know, you've got 70 or 80% of your team underperforming. And so it's a real risk a company runs by having having two high performers and three or four underperformers. So, you know, what DealPad helps is to really improve revenue per rep. So each individual salesperson is closer to quota. And now when you look at revenue, you know, let's say you get to 100% last year, but it was made up predominantly of two people, just like over-indexing on their quota and three or four underachieving. You know, what we try and get teams to do is to say, okay, you've hit 100%, but, you know, 60% of that is split across your team, or 70% is split across the whole team, which is a much healthier, more scalable situation. But it's been difficult. You know, it's hard to educate sales leaders on the fact that they need help. And you know, and then I think it's the question that I'm really passionate about talking about is, you know, good and elite. And I think that sales leaders particularly, settle for being good. And let me tell you what I mean by that. You know, let's use the 100% of sales quota achievement as an example. So you have a company that deliver 100% of quota last year. I'm making this up, right? But let's just run with it. You have a company that deliver 100% of revenue last year. What they're now not looking at is what they missed, right? What was the missed opportunity? How much time did we spend in deals we didn't win? And if any sales leader does that analysis, I can categorically say that they will be astonished by how many hours their team, not just sales, but anybody that supports the sales motion, spent in deals they didn't win. The demos, the going through evaluations, filling out RFPs, value engineering teams kind of trying to kind of show the value to a buyer. It's hundreds of hours a year for a small team, thousands of hours for a bigger team. If you could redeploy that time back into deals you thought you had a better chance of winning, what could that do for revenue? Would that get you to 150 or 200% of quota? And then it's discovery. I joined a company. This is a good example. I joined a company, and their average ACV, average contract value, was $14,000 a year. And I said to them, "We're going to increase this to 100,000." And they looked at me and they said, "That's crazy. How are we going to sell a product we're selling today 15,000 for 100,000?" I said, "Well, we're not. So we're going to sell it for $1 million, but our average AC contract value is going to be 100,000." And they looked at me like I was nuts. And I spoke to the founder, and he was, really kind of energized by the fact that they had signed this company and were paying them $15K a year. And then when I looked at that company, they had 5 billion revenues. And I said to him, "Okay, look, this is good. You've signed up, you've won this account, but they've got 5 billion revenue. Like, have you even thought about, what the CEO cares about? Because, at 15K, I can tell you that the CEO probably doesn't even know they're using your software." And what actually transpired was that this company needed to reach compliance on something within the next 3 years globally for their entire company, or they were going to get fined millions, like tens of millions of dollars. And they had no idea how they were going to solve it. The reason we found out was because we looked at their annual report for the year prior. And one of the priorities for them, one of the kind of the rocks that they wanted to achieve, was to get closer to compliance over the next 12 months. And it's exactly what we did. So here we were working with a company that had a massive noose around their neck, that were in for millions and millions of dollars of fines, worrying about how they were going to solve it when we were already working together. And they didn't even know that we could help them. And we didn't even know they had the problem. So as soon as we found that out, we got access to more of the kind of the up the higher echelons, and then we finally actually got access to the CFO, and we signed a deal over 3 years that was worth almost 9 million. So we increased the contract value over 3 years from about 40K to 9 million, just by understanding what the problem was at a company-wide level and how critical it was for them to solve it and what the cost was if they didn't. So, that's an extreme example. And obviously I'm giving that as an example. There aren't many of those examples. In fact, that's the best example I could give you, right? Which is why I'm using it. But if you think about a more realistic situation, if you're a sales leader right now, just think about the revenue you're taking from each customer. Is it enough? Are you solving a critical business pain that sits across the organization you're selling into, or are you taking revenue from a small team and being happy with that, and thinking this is good? And it's a big thing. And one of the levers that I pull in every organization that I've been in, whether it's my own, I've built revenue from 0 to 20 million in my company. The biggest lever of growth is to find a bigger pain to solve. Because you're now going to take a company from, a smaller account value to a much larger ACV.
How practically do you find bigger problems to solve?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, it's discovery. Discovery is by far, in my opinion, the most important thing that a salesperson can do, a team, a company can do. I want to know everything about that organization. So it's the research that sales development can do. It's getting access to all of the right people so we can have better conversations. It's interviewing people inside our prospect to find out what they care about, what they're behind on, what their job relies on, what they're comped against. It's talking to the C-suite to find out what their business imperatives are for the year or for the next 3 years. What do they really want to do? And then leaning in to help them figure out how they get there and showing them that you can help them. And it's taking the approach that we're not going to stop. We're not going to sign this contract until we're confident we've exposed a company-wide problem. And now it doesn't mean to say we're going to get that signed and sealed as a company-wide problem. It might mean that we start much smaller and we incrementally, upsell and grow the account. Land and expand is a big strategy. But we know where we want to head, right? Yeah. We know as we go into that organization that this is the problem they've got, not the one we're solving today. The problem they've got is way up here. And how do we get ourselves there? And now a growth plan is clear, right? We're here at this level. This is what we're doing. This is the problem we really want to solve. How do we get ourselves to that point? Rather than what I see so often is, this is the problem we're solving. It's great. Now let's go and find other growth inside this company. We don't know where it sits. And, you spend tons of time talking to the wrong people. You spend tons of time talking to people that can't influence or can't get you around the organization. You don't know what you're doing. You're literally navigating through your customer blind to try and help them grow. And it will almost always fail. It certainly won't become optimal for you. And so during that first discovery phase, you just optimize for finding the biggest pain that you can. And it needs to be company-wide, whether that company's got 10 million revenue, 1 billion revenue, or 10 billion revenue. You need to find what that critical problem is that they want to solve. Everyone's got it. Doesn't mean to say you're going to better solve it when you get there, but at least you know what it is. And I think that most salespeople that I know, I've met, and sales leaders don't think about that every time they go into a sales call. And sales leaders aren't holding reps accountable for that level of scrutiny and discovery. And it's the biggest lever of revenue growth that I've seen across every company that I've worked with.
And it sounds like this is one of those things that you feel takes a sales leader from good to elite. What are some of the other things that you found that are in that elite category that people might not be thinking of doing?
Yeah, it's not rocket science. It's just, it's having the right people around you. I think there's definitely data to suggest that you need people that have been on the journey you're about to go on. And that's really important as well. So, you don't want people in your team that haven't experienced where you're about to go over the next 2 years. So if you've got people in your team that are, really good and experienced and knowledgeable about, working in companies of the size you're at now, it's going to be hard for them to level up because you only know what you know. Right? They're not going to be able to see things. If you hire people in companies that are way ahead of you, like if you're a 5-10 million, let's say 5 million ARR company, don't hire from Google. Like, Google opens doors, it opens conversations. Like, you don't have that when you've got 5 million ARR. People no one's ever heard of you. Like, the salesperson coming in that's managed to get themselves to the table of their buyer because it's Google is going to be really frustrated when they can't do it with you because nobody's ever heard of who you are. Navigating the challenges of moving from 1 million to 3 million revenue. Nobody that works at Google and hasn't been on that journey is ever going to help, because they're so used to having process and structure and all these roles to fall back on, coaches, people that are domain experts. You haven't got all of that to give somebody. If you're at 1 million to 3, if you're at 1 million ARR and you want to move to 3 million, find people that have been on that journey, and you want to make sure that they've actually delivered that journey, not somebody that joined at 1 million and left at 1.5. You want to see somebody and with evidence that they've been at an organization in the role that you need from 1 million, and you've taken them to 3 million. They're the people you want. And then the challenge from there is, once you hit 3 million, you now need people in your business that have managed to get to 10, right? They've taken the 3 to 10 million journey. But then what do you do with the people that you've just hired to take you from 1 to 3? And so, because now they're not the right people for your business anymore. And so you've literally got to continually develop the people in your business. You bring people that have been from the 3 to 10 phase, and you get them to coach the people that you've already got into what needs to happen, what they're about to see. This is what we're going to experience. This is going to be our journey. These are going to be the peaks and the troughs that we're going to hit. These are going to be the roadblocks that we come up against, because they've done it. They know it. They can see ahead of where we are today. People in that 3 million phase have never seen it before. And so it's really important that you continually hire the people that have been on your journey and get them to bring everybody else in the organization with them. I see so often that companies, particularly at early stage, and look, it's a finance issue. They probably haven't got the budget to keep hiring this way, or to make lots of different hires. But you bring somebody, I see a lot, you bring somebody in at 1 million revenue, and you're expecting them to do the job you need them to do when you hit 3, and they've never done it before. Whose fault is that? When that goes wrong, or when they're good but they're not elite, whose fault is that? It's the companies. It's the hiring manager. It's the leaders. It's not the person that they've hired. And often, they'll get fired because they're not doing their job. They're not hitting the revenue targets or the KPIs they were brought in to do. But it's not their fault. And so I think that this is a big factor, in my opinion, in successfully scaling out of phases.
One of the things you've touched on briefly as you were just talking is about leadership. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about the leadership lessons that you learned when you were taking your companies through the different stages that you mentioned, the 0 to 1 million, 1 to 3, 3 to 10, and then 10 and beyond. What were some of the leadership lessons that you learned at each of those stages?
Yeah, it's a good one. Well, look, I think at the kind of the 1 million ARR mark, you haven't got a big team usually. I mean, unless you've kind of overfunded, but let's assume you haven't. So, either then you're the founder or you're the first sales hire in. And what I find is, if you're the first sales hire in, it's going to be exceptionally difficult for you because there's probably not the market fit that you need. The deals that have been done to get to the 1 million are probably founder-led. They're unscalable. They're largely relationship-driven, discount-driven. The founder's done them, and it's going to be hard. And so, you need to give the incoming person time to develop themselves, to learn the product, to be credible selling your product, and you need, and they need to have been at an organization that has been at that 500,000 mark. So they've been they've been through the journey that you're on now, and they've, helped grow it into, a 3 to 5 million ARR company because they've been through the journey you're about to go on. And, so I think at that 1 million ARR mark, it's how do we become a more scalable, less scrappy organization? And you need to lead towards that. At 1 to 3 million, I think that, you're still making lots of mistakes around your ICP. You need to establish who your ideal buyers are. And you start to define a process. You'll probably hire. I would always suggest you hire a sales development team first before you hire a manager. 90% of companies at the kind of 1 million to 3 million ARR mark have a pipeline problem. So hiring a head of sales, which is what most companies will do, isn't going to help you solve the pipeline problem. Heads of sales want to manage, they want to lead. They're not experts. They don't enjoy prospecting. They don't enjoy hours of research. That's what you really need. You need to build pipeline. And then you find someone, if it's not you as the founder or the first sales hire, to close those deals. As soon as you start to see traction there, you then bring in, somebody that can lead a team and build it. But, I find so often that the first sales hire in is the head of sales because now they can build their own team. And frankly, I think that's bullshit because, it's not the role that you need as your first sales hire. You need to build pipeline. And so you need to lead your organization, lead your sales development people well enough to be able to start to build a process that you can scale. And as it scales, you'll start to see more deals coming into the pipeline. You'll start to see what happens through the stages of those pipeline, how long it takes you to move a deal from one stage to the next to closing it. What typically happens when we start to close deals? Are we seeing, are we seeing 6 stakeholders in our buying team? Are we seeing these particular roles that we really know we need to influence in every deal that we win? When we don't win deals, is it because, we're not seeing this individual or we're not ticking this off? How many of the deals we're working on do we need to create a business plan for, like a business case for? How many of these deals are being won via RFP? How many are being won via relationship? How many are being won because we've set a great discovery? Well, you just learn, right? And then that's how you can build your team. And I think that also at that 1 to 3 million stage, you're going through a ton of experimentation. You don't know what works very well. So you've got to experiment, and you need to make sure that your leadership style and approach is fluid, and you don't have judgment, because if people come into an organization and feel like they're going to be judged for failing, they're not going to experiment. And if you're not experimenting at 1 to 3 million, you'll probably not scale. And so, it's the understanding from the people that are bringing these new individuals in, that are leading these teams, that yes, we need to hit goals and objectives and revenue milestones, but we need to experiment. And so, we need to give people the support and the coaching and the time to be able to be successful here. Because that 1 to 3 million kind of phase, it's all about experimentation. And what you want to achieve at the end of that 3 million mark is that you've really defined a single market. You know who your customer is. You know why they buy from you. You've got a process now that you can repeat. And at that point, you go out and you scale it. And the next phase is the 3 to 10 million, which you just optimize for growth, right? We know who our, we know who our customer is. We know what they buy. We know how to make them successful. We've got a process. We've done a lot of analysis now around our pipeline and the deals we win and we lose. We know what we need to do, and now we're ready to scale it. And so typically, as a go-to-market leader, you'd start at 3 million. You'd start to bring in RevOps. Become more data oriented. You'd have enough data to start to become a bit more strategic in how you went to market. You would double down on product innovation at that phase, because actually what you really want to do is you want to give customers more opportunities to buy from you. And you need to show new customers growth, product growth, so they can actually now they have more capabilities. And that will help you do two things. That will help increase customer value, increase lifetime value of the customer. So your revenues are going to go up. You'll have more to upsell now, right? Because at the point you hit 3 million, you've got a good base of customers. What you really want to do is to upsell them and grow with them, because it's going to be much easier to hit 10 million if you're renewing close to 100% of your customers, and your net customer growth is above 100%, because now you're not only you're retaining customers, you're growing them. But to do that, you need to focus on product innovation, and then ACV. So our average order value is 10K. We want to move it to 50K. How do we do that? If you focus on those two things at that 3 to 10 million mark, the ability to be able to sell more to customers and the ability to charge more, getting from 3 to 10 is not going to be that difficult. And if you can then build a really good go-to-market motion where you're acquiring new logos at the same time, you're going to set yourself up really well. And once you hit 10 million and you get into phase 4, that jump from 10 to 30 actually is probably the easiest phase.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And when you hit 30, you hit another hard phase, right? But if you can really nail that 3 to 10 million phase, you should be able to get from 10 to 30 very quickly. It's where I see most companies struggle, it's at the 1 to 3, but like by far, not even questionable. It's we don't have product market fit. We don't know why our customers buy from us. We don't have a process. We're still scrapping. We're still experimenting a lot. We don't know what works very well. There's not much repeatable stuff going on here. Once you get out of that, and that's where most companies get stuck. Once you get out of that, you should be able to get yourself to 10 just by optimizing, iterating a bit, and building something that's repeatable and you can scale. But when you get to that 10 to that phase 4, leadership, the way that you think about how you lead your company and your teams changes, because now what we need to do is we need to optimize for margin and profit and not growth as much, right? We want to grow, but any company that's indexing towards 20, 30 million ARR should start to think about being profitable, should start to think about margin growth. Because actually, if you want to be a PE acquisition, you're going to have to do that. You're probably going to think about moving to enterprise, and what do you now need? What roles do you have that you didn't have or you don't have today to help you move there? You need to have system integrator relationships and partnerships and lots of things that you're not thinking about today. And if you do all of that right, you'll move from 30 to 100. But that's a difficult phase, because you've really got to grow up. And what you'll find is that a lot of the customers that have got you to that 10 to 30 million stage are not going to be your customers tomorrow. They won't be the customers that are going to get you to 100 million. And that's a big challenge, because you've got to keep the revenue. You've got to, you need those customers over the next few years, but they're not going to be the customers you care about over, in the fairly near future. So, which is why I think it's a tough phase to go through. But yeah, so I've gone very deep on answering a question that I probably haven't answered in the way that you asked the question around leadership. But I think leadership isn't about, well, I mean, it is about, but leadership is kind of the micro and the macro, right? I've gone very micro there in terms of how you lead a company, how you lead people, and how you go to market depends on the stage you're at. How you think, who you need, it's the stage you're in. You can go micro on it, and you can say, okay, well, actually, we should all be servant leaders. We should all, get in the box with our teams, and we should, empower them to do things. And yeah, you're right. But I think generally leadership should be thought about on a much more macro level, much more strategic level. Because again, if you're a great leader and you're a great coach, but you're not thinking about the bigger picture, you're not thinking strategically about, what phase you're in and how you're going to move from one phase to the other, and what you need to do, what you need to achieve, the milestones you need to hit. You won't come up from the sand, like you'll just drown. And so I think leadership for me is very much a strategic role. It's about being a visionary and knowing how you're going to move from one phase into the next. And I do think it's helpful for everyone, not just founders, but everyone to really segment their phases. Now, they don't have to be what I've described, the 0 to 1 million, the 1 million to 3, the 3 to 10, the 10 to 30. It can be completely different. They're just the phases that I've typically created, and it's worked quite well for me. But you do need to think about the phases you're going through, because it will really help.
I think that I'm glad that you answered the question that way, because I think that sometimes people don't mix the micro and the macro very well. There are some people who are great at the micro in terms of, okay, my approach to leadership is this. They often struggle a bit with the macro, thinking about the big strategic picture, the phases. There are also some people who are really good at the macro level, but terrible at the micro level. And I think the great or elite leaders are the ones that can bridge the gap between the two, understand the macro and the strategic, and then execute the micro in such a way that everything layers really well up to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things that I wanted to ask you was about that feeling of having to let go, because you've talked about it a few times in different ways. So in selling your companies, in realizing that actually the people who are here from, let's say, 0 to 1 might not be the right people from 1 to 3, or even now where you're saying about the customers who helped us get to this point might not be our customers of the future. How do you engage with that as a leader and deal with that kind of thing? Because that's going to happen as you scale.
Yeah. Look, I again, we spent a lot of time talking about phases. And so I think about it in phases in my life, right? There aren't many things in life. In fact, there's hardly anything in my life, this is not a good thing, by the way, that stays the same.
Okay.
Right? And that's obviously how I'm wired, and I've got myself at peace with that. I think that you'll find people that have been married for 30 years, or have been with the same person for donkey's years, or have been 17 years in a job role. I mean, that's never something that's going to happen to me. And so I understand that. And I think that the more I've come to understand myself personally, the more I've realized that there's just no point me thinking about a 15-year tenure in a company. I'm a 5 to 10 year person in anything. And like for work, that's fine, because I know I'll come in, I'll be massively passionate for 5 to 10 years, completely focused. and then I know that I'll start to get bored and I want another challenge. And I think so. I've never built a lifestyle company. I've never wanted to build a company and this is it for me. It's always I've wanted to build a great business. I've done it because I've wanted to solve a real problem that makes a big difference to the customer. And we've always, every company that I work with, we put the customer first, like front and center. So, are we solving a big problem that really fundamentally helps our customer? That's the first question that I would ask. That's what drives me the most. How big can we take this? Where can we get this to? That's what excites me, right? But there's always an end point to that, and I know that. So the kind of stepping away bit doesn't really worry me. I think the people part, if I'm really honest, I think I used to be really ruthless on that. And I've got much kinder, much more empathetic over the last 10 years than I was. And so I take great responsibility, and I want all of my leadership team to take great responsibility in the people we hire. And I want to make sure that one of our main drivers, our main goals, is to develop the people that come into our business and help them grow. And when you do that, you either have people that stay with you for a long time and develop and grow and move through the phases in a way that you need them to, but also works for them, or they outgrow you and they leave. And that's also not a bad thing, right? There's this great quote, and I've said it. I'm not sure if I'm going to better recite it totally, but there's this great quote where the CFO says to the CEO, we shouldn't invest in developing these people because what if they leave? And the CEO replies, but what if they stay?
Yeah, and we don't invest in them. Yeah.
Right. And so I think that with people, you've got to make the best choice that you can. Obviously, it's going to go wrong sometimes. You've got to really have a culture where you're able to support them, develop them, bring them through in a way that you need them to come through. And they need to obviously want to do that and have the capacity to do it as well. And then I think everything else typically works itself out. The outcomes will be that, you let some people go because they haven't got themselves to where you need them to be. Now, that's not our fault because we've invested in those people and they just haven't done it. That's fine. And, at that point, I genuinely don't have any, hard times telling these people that it's just the end of the journey with us, right? It might be that they decide that they've outgrown us, and that's great as well. Or it might be that, we're going through the next phase in our journey, and I think you're perfect for this particular role. It's probably not going to be the role that you're in now, but what do you think about this? And you have those conversations. So, and then I think, just finally, because I interlock everything, my personal and my professional life. I think that the way that I am has worked really well in business, and it's been not as good personally because, if I'm somebody that gets bored easily and, I'm that kind of 5 to 10 year person, that's not great for, people in my personal life. And, I've also, to a large degree, got peaceful with that as well. But that's just who I am.
My last question for you is, you mentioned that about 10 years ago, you became a bit kinder and a bit more empathetic. Was there something that happened that made you change?
A bunch of things. I grew up. I spent a lot of time on my own personal development, really understanding who I am, what makes me tick, what my triggers are, why I make decisions the way I do, wanting to be kinder. I was never an unkind person, but it was, kindness almost became my North Star value. And when you do that, you think about things differently. So I certainly did. I think there was a moment in my second company where we were running out of money, and I couldn't afford to pay anybody. And we were like 3 weeks away, or 2, or less than that, like a week and a half away from them having to pay them at the end of the month. And I sat down with the team and I just said, look, guys, we didn't raise the money that we were hoping to. I can't guarantee that I'm going to better pay you at the end of the month. I also can't tell you when I'm going to better pay you. You're free to leave if you want. Like, I can't keep you here, but anybody that leaves, I will make sure that we do pay you at some point for the work you've done, the time you've given us. Nobody left. Like, everybody stayed.
Wow.
And my commitment to them was that I would drop everything that I was doing and go out and raise money, because that was the only way that we were going to be able to pay people. We didn't have the time to ramp revenues, or in fact, we didn't have any revenue. So it was difficult. So I dropped everything and went out and raised money, and it took me about 6 weeks, and I didn't pay anybody for 6 weeks. That was 2 months total for them without any pay. That was a really tough moment to have to tell people that, but also a transitional moment for me, that people really trusted me. They cared enough about what they were doing, what they were working on. It was more important than money at that point. Now, obviously, if it had gone on, months, then I don't think people would have been able to afford to do it. But that, for me personally, that was a moment where I saw an enormous amount of kindness and trust given to me, and that profoundly affected me. That made me soften up a lot.
Wow, that's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you so much for being part of this podcast. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I know other people will too. So, Adam, thank you so much.
You're welcome. And can I just say that, if I can, quick kind of personal plug, if anybody wants to kind of reach out, I genuinely love helping. So if there are questions that people have on anything go-to-market, specifically anything sales related, my LinkedIn is Adam L. Baker. Just link in with me. Say that you've seen me on this podcast, and I'd be very happy to, help you navigate through a question or a challenge that you've got. I actually enjoy doing it, so don't feel that people can't do that.
Awesome. We'll put a link in the show notes for people as well. So yeah, thank you so much, Adam.
Thanks, Tommy. Really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you for listening to another episode of What Makes You Tick. I hope that you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed having the conversation.
Absolutely. There's so much value in learning from virtual mentors, people that have already gone through incredible careers, and they've got wonderful stories and lessons that they can share for you to have a bigger and better career in tech. And if you like this sort of content, we've also got a newsletter that we publish weekly called Growth Magnet, all about tech startups, leadership, scaling, and performance. We'll put a link in the show notes, and it'll be fantastic to see your comments on our next post.